These players will absolutely disappoint you in fantasy football this week, might even kick you out of the playoff run that you're hoping to make. I don't care how big your league is. It could be 12 people, it could be 20 people. We are not going to be starting these absolute traps in week 14 of fantasy football. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video as well, because I will be going over my number one quarterback sit of the week. You need to make sure that he's not on your team and in your roster, because he is started in 30% of leagues as we speak right now in this very moment. If you guys do appreciate this video and want to be generous today, hit that like button. It's free and it takes 2 seconds, but I will never waste your time. The first bust we need to be avoiding in our starting roster this week is going to pain me a lot. It is Deebo Samuel. Yes, he's talented, but he does not get the looks. He does not get the opportunities, and it's just the reality of the world that we're living in right now. And it's not like this is a new thing. He's been averaging only 2.7 receptions per game since returning from his injury in week 4. This has been essentially a season-long issue that he's dealing with. It just doesn't get much worse. He's the wide receiver 43 on the year in what's supposed to be the wide receiver 1 for the 49ers with no Brandon Ayuk, but he's only running 23 routes per game. That's good for the wide receiver 63. As the number one option in a team, how are you only running 20 routes a game? Wide receivers with a target share of over 20% is typically what you look for and what you want it to be considered a top wide receiver option. Every single wide receiver in the top 35 this year has over a 20% team target share. If you look at Deebo, that mark of a 20% target share would only give him 4.5 targets a game based on his routes run number at 23. So his highest potential ceiling is not even that high. Now, with top caliber wide receivers and top talented guys like Deebo Samuel presumably is, he obviously does carry that risk if you're going to be sitting him, because he's Deebo Samuel. These types of guys do have the ability to defy those statistics, which is why he's probably being started in about 70% of leagues right now. But he's only had 2 games over 7 fantasy points in his last 6 matchups. That's just not going to get it done. We're trying to get into the fantasy football playoffs or secure ourselves a good seed. It's not something I want to be risking as of now in a matchup that's not even that positive either. Because you look at it, it's a mix of a very negative matchup against the Bears and Jalen Johnson. That is the biggest issue of this entire thing, let alone Deebo's inefficiency himself. This man is ranked inside the top 3 cornerbacks in coverage grade, in receiving yards allowed, and passer rating allowed to quarterbacks this year. You look at the past few matchups facing the Bears and Jalen Johnson specifically, he held Amon-Ra to only 5 receptions, 73 yards, no touchdowns. Justin Jefferson only 2 receptions for 27 yards, no touchdowns, despite the Vikings scoring 30 points. Jalen Johnson also held Jalen Reed to 2 receptions and 23 yards the week before that. You can just keep going down this list of guys. Maybe there's a chance that Jalen Johnson plays in coverage and maybe in a zone, and more often than not isn't going to be shadowing Deebo Samuel. But when you don't have Ayuk, Juwan Jennings is your second best wide receiver option, there's pretty slim chances that Jalen Johnson is not going to be taking the defensive focus of Deebo Samuel. If he can't perform against positive defensive matchups and what he's been seeing over the past 6 weeks, there's no way that he's going to outperform Jalen Johnson. He's had 3 straight games under 25 receiving yards. That is just historically bad. I do believe in his potential to see more usage in the run game, at least without Christian McCaffrey or Jordan Mason. If those rushing attempts go up, okay, maybe that's cool. Maybe he'll get an extra goal line rushing attempt, a jet sweep. How many fantasy points is that really, though, unless he scores a touchdown? And in that case, anybody that scores a touchdown is going to be a flex guy option for you. At the very least, temper your expectations. The second absolute trap of this video is going to be a very, very easy one. It's Chuba Hubbard. I do not believe in his success this week, coming into what's started to become the toughest matchup in overall positions this year in the Philadelphia Eagles. Their defense has been zooming absolutely amazing all over the field so far, especially as of late. They allow the number 1 least total yards to opposing offenses at 282.2, the 3rd least fantasy points to opposing running backs, and only 3.6 yards per carry to that position. That is bottom 5 in efficiency allowed to running backs this year. They're coming off a game where they just held one of the best running backs in the entire NFL in Derrick Henry to his 2nd scoreless game of the entire season. That's a little bit scary because Chuba Hubbard is not on the same caliber as Derrick Henry. There is some real risk in this matchup, to mention the fact that the Eagles are favored by 12.5 points. By far the biggest point differential of the week. That's not going to help. The reason that is such a detriment is because the Panthers have the number 1 lowest implied team total at 16 points as well. So if they're not going to be scoring, the Eagles are going to be scoring a ton. There's no way that they can stick to the run game and get Chuba Hubbard a decent amount of carries. And it doesn't help that Chuba is losing his receiving role to Jonathan Brooks. You look at last week, you'd think as the RB1, he'd get a good amount of that, but Jonathan Brooks saw 3 receptions to Chuba Hubbard 0. He didn't even get 1 target. Jonathan Brooks doubled him up in routes run last week against the Buccaneers. He also was splitting a good amount of usage and efficiency. He had 41 rushing yards compared to Chuba at 43. Chuba did have more rushing attempts. Jonathan Brooks isn't just going to take this number 1 role, but Chuba Hubbard is still being started in a lot of leagues, way more than he should be coming into a very negative matchup. The only way he meets his projections for this week is if he falls into the end zone. Again, you could say that for any player. There's no way he should be in 76% of starting rosters across the entire fantasy football base. Get him out of there. But another running back we need to be avoiding at all costs, even more than Chuba Hubbard, is going to be Gus Edwards. He has been underperforming extremely bad as of late. Again, started in 40% of leagues. That should be 0. If you look at yesterday's video that I posted, I was talking a little bit about this matchup and how the Chiefs defense is actually a little bit more positive than they have been compared to earlier in the season. If you guys want to look at that video, I will pin a card here. You can just click it, watch it. It has timestamps, really easy to watch. It's a video full of must-start players, the absolute opposite of this video. But if you look at it, the Chiefs defense has been a lot better against the pass, not anywhere near against the run. Their run-stopping defense is still one of the best and elite in the entire NFL. They're only allowing 3.4 yards per carry to opposing running backs. That's the #1 lowest. Yes, better than the Eagles. They're allowing the 3rd fewest rushing yards per game to running backs, specifically at 87.8. And he really hasn't been seeing the usage. He's averaging 7 total touches per game. That's including his receiving numbers since coming back from his injury in Week 10, then becoming the full-time RB1 after J.K. Dobbins got injured. Still, since that stretch, only 1 reception. That is just nowhere near what it should be if you're going to be starting him at least. He's never really been a receiving running back. His best career year ever, he only had 12 receptions total. To make it even worse, he is splitting time with Kamani Vidal, who saw 4 carries and 26% of the snaps last week. Even Hassan Haskins is getting some run at 15% of the snaps as well. This should be a spot where the Chargers stick to the pass completely. They've been having success in that aspect recently. I'd start a lot of running backs over this guy this week, and if you have start-sit questions specifically, make sure to ask them in the comments. I will try to answer as many as I possibly can, as I do in every single video. But something that seems obvious but apparently isn't is starting Amari Cooper. He's in 58% of starting lineups. I do not agree with that. He is going to bust. Do not put him in your starting lineups this week. That is too much. Since joining the Bills in Week 7, he's averaged 2.5 receptions a game, and he's only had 1 game over a 50% snap share. Those are not numbers making me think, okay, let's risk it all in this Week 14 matchup to get us a good playoff seed or even into the playoffs in the first place. The reason he's being started in so many leagues is probably because of how good the Bills offense is. They are 7th in passing touchdowns. That brings a lot of upside. Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Now, to be fair to Amari Cooper, he has played through a snow game, and he's been on and off with a wrist injury, so he really hasn't seen a good amount of snaps because of it, but it is still not worth the potential downside in a neutral matchup against the Rams, who allowed the 18th least points to opposing wide receivers this year. They're more in the second half, the back half, as far as fantasy points allowed. We also have Keon Coleman likely coming back into this matchup, returning from injury. Khalil Shakir has quietly been Josh Allen's top target, leading the team in first read target share, as well as just general targets on the team as well. Dalton Kincaid might be coming back into this matchup. There's a lot of opportunities for other guys in this offense to come in and take targets, making Amari Cooper that much more of a risky play. And it's not like this Rams defense is one of the easiest, like a Tampa Bay Buccaneers or something like that we can put a guy in and just not really worry about because the matchup is so good. But looking at a tight end that will disappoint this week, I do not care how deep your league is. It's going to be Cole Kmet. He started in 41% of leagues right now. Now, we do have to be completely honest. When I give you guys these statistics, I don't just give you the ones that make sense to the point I'm trying to make. We have to cover all sides of the coin here. With Thomas Brown as the new offensive coordinator, it is 100% an upgrade to this entire offense in the tight end room. And against the 49ers in this matchup that he does get this week, they've allowed over 7 fantasy points to tight ends in 3 out of their last 4 games. Now, is that an amazing number that is just like, okay, we have to start all these tight ends? No, 7 fantasy points isn't necessarily amazing, but the 49ers defense is considered one of the better ones. And, you know, at the tight end position, how much success can you really see? There's so many busts at the position this year, but there's also so much target competition in this Bears offense to deal with. You have 3 capable wide receivers in the mix. DJ Moore leading this team in total targets. Rome Odunze leading this team in air yards. Realize and unrealized. Keenan Allen doing what he does, 31 targets in the last 3 games as well as 3 touchdowns. This makes Kmet the 4th option in a boom or bust offense. He's had 3 games with double-digit fantasy points this year, but he's also had 4 games under 5 fantasy points. That's just complete 2 different sides of the spectrum, and he's only at a 64.4% route participation on the year. That's good for the tight end 20. Despite playing over 90% of the snaps on average every single week, he doesn't split tight end snaps like a lot of other guys do. Still doesn't participate on that many routes, and his blocking isn't great. That's the thing. He has one of the lowest block success rate in the NFL at the tight end position right here. So, I mean, what can you really say? There is a lot of better options than him. Guys that I would be starting over him this week are Kyle Pitts, Will Dissly, Juwan Johnson even. I would believe in those guys a lot more in this matchup. But my number 1 must avoid coming at the quarterback position is a guy being started in 30% of fantasy football leagues. That I guarantee you should be at 0. It is Aaron Rodgers. He put up 15 fantasy points on the Seahawks last week and then 16 on the Colts before their bye week, and he had 2 or more passing touchdowns in the last 4 out of 5 games. Okay, maybe that looks pretty good when you look at the numbers in that aspect. But all of this is a lie for fantasy football. In week 14, one of the hardest matchups of the week, he comes in against the Dolphins, who allow the third least points to opposing quarterbacks. This defense might not seem that crazy to you because their run defense is a lot softer than over the air for the quarterbacks, wide receivers, and the tight ends. They're likely not going to have Breece Hall in this matchup. He is ruled doubtful. So the Jets could be in a ton of trouble if they don't have their number one running back. They have Braylon Allen back there. The Dolphins defense did not perform against the Packers last week. We have to be realistic. But these are two completely different offenses. The Packers are 25th in passing attempts per game, but 6th in passing yards per game. You look at the Jets, 9th in passing attempts. They pass a lot, but 23rd in passing yards. Literally like two opposite sides of the spectrum in efficiency. They also did play in a freezing temperature game. The Dolphins just don't play in the cold. Now it's going to be in Miami in the warmth, so they're probably going to play a lot better. They're not going to have 20 missed tackles like they did last week. That Packers offense is just way better in total, but the Jets are 6-point underdogs in this matchup, so maybe Aaron Rodgers is forced to pass more and he'll get pass volume, maybe score a couple extra touchdowns. But when you look at that, he's going to need at the very least 2 touchdowns to be even viable in fantasy football. He's been doing that all year, getting 2 passing touchdowns a game. He's still averaging less than 15 fantasy points in each matchup, and he has negative rushing upside. He's averaging a 90.5 QB passer rating on the year. That's good for the QB 23. Despite being top 10 in passing volume and passing attempts, you'd expect him to see a little bit more success. But that's going to finish off this video. Thank you guys so much for sticking all the way through. I wish you good luck in fantasy football this week to get to the playoffs. All glory to the man above.